Hi there. Today we're going to talk about yield management. If you're not doing this at all, it can be kind of difficult and uncomfortable, but if you work through the challenges, it can become a regular process every week or two, and it can add huge value to your business. You might also be doing it very infrequently because it's hard to do. So we're going to show you some ways to do that that are a little bit cheaper or a little bit easier, and then there's also more expensive automated ways to do it. But it is perhaps one of the most valuable things you could do to improve overall profitability of your property. There's a couple reasons for that. One is it kind of allows you to see into the future. You can see your revenue and in future dates. Before that date arrives, while there is still time to take action. You don't run out of time and then try and sell your rooms too cheaply at the last minute and maybe still end up with a lot of vacancy. Or in other cases, you might have an opportunity to raise rates out in the future, but you can't really see that unless you're doing yield management. The other reason it's important is because your business as a hotel, you have high fixed costs, right? And that means that a change in revenue does not necessarily mean a change in cost. And that's good in the positive sense in that if your revenue goes up, your costs don't go up as much, and so you can be very profitable. But the reverse is also true, which is that if your revenue goes down, your costs don't really decrease all that much, and so that can be very unprofitable. So there's a big impact on profitability there. And there is revenue management software that automates a lot of this, but it can be complicated and expensive to install and to use. But you can also do it with spreadsheets, and I'll go through some basic concepts so that you can kind of get a better feel for the concepts, and then we'll talk about different ways to get it done. But it's something you should be doing regardless of how it gets done. So let's get started. So the first data point you need are the days, right? So this usually starts from today going forward. With yield management, you're really not looking backward much, except to maybe compare it against the same period last year, if you have that data. But we're going to kind of leave that part of it aside for the moment. So you're looking from today forward. And sometimes it's very easy to download the next 180 days of data or maybe 365 days of data. So you might extend it out all the way that far, but the reality is most hotels are going to manage more tightly and make adjustments in the next sort of 3 or 4 months, sort of 90 to 120 days. And then you want to pull in your occupancy, and your occupancy should come from the PMS. Now we are using the term occupancy, but to be more specific, it's your reservations, right? You want to pull it from the place that's most accurate, that reflects all the channels and all the sales and every reservation, even if it came in from the telephone or from direct booking or any number of travel agencies. So your PMS should be the ultimate source of truth, so to speak, and that should reflect all of your reservations for every room and every date. So you want to pull in your occupancy, or some people might call it availability, which is kind of the flip side, right? The number of rooms that are available that are not reserved. Then you want to pull in your rates. Now, obviously, you could pull them in from the PMS in different places, but the thing is, your rack rate is typically in the PMS, and then it may get pushed out to the direct booking engine or to the channel manager, where there's other adjustments made for packages or promotions or meals and so on. So, you want to be able to compare your rates with your competitor rates, and so you want to pull those from the same source. And some of these sources that I have listed here, Expedia or OTA Insights or Revcaster, Profit, there's many others, but you can pull in the data that reflects your final rate to the consumer and also your competitor rate. So it's the rate that's really displayed as the final rate to the consumer, and you want to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. Some of you may be surprised to see Expedia there. They do have a tool recently, within the last year or so, I guess, that allows you to pull in competitor rates, but it's not at the room level. So it's just at the property level, but it is free. These other services cost money, varies from 50 to 100 bucks a month, depending on the size of hotel that you have. But Expedia has a free tool where you can pull in the lowest available rate for a property and for all your competitors and yourself. Now, the problem with that is that if they've sold out of the cheaper rooms, then that lowest available rate could reflect a more expensive room, which you may be then comparing to your cheaper rooms because that's the cheapest rate available. So it can have a little bit of imperfection, but it can also work. The times when that happens in most markets that I've seen, I would say, the data is 90 to 95% accurate, but about 5 or 10% of the time, you might see an invalid comparison of different room types. But doing it at the property level can also be useful, and that tool is free to download that data. But the important thing is you want to have your rates being the final consumer rates and also the competitor rates, so that you're really comparing apples to apples. And then you kind of line those up on the same dates, your occupancy with your rates and the competitor rates. So you have a spreadsheet that may be 300 columns long, but it's certainly manageable once you get used to it. It does take a little bit of Excel skill, but a lot of these things can be copied out into the future for hundreds of columns if you need, which are hundreds of days. So let's look at an example here. This is, let's say that on the far left here, your occupancy, days from today is kind of the bottom horizontal axis, right? So on the far left, that's basically today or tomorrow, and then you have 6 days from now, 11 days from now, all the way up to 56 days from now, right? And in the near term, hopefully your occupancy is a little bit higher. Let's say it's 80%, right, for tomorrow. And as you go out into the future, obviously, all your rooms are not fully booked. So on day 60, you might have an occupancy that's more like 40%. So 60% of your rooms are available. Now, let's say that you look and your occupancy is actually significantly lower in this period right here. So sort of 22 to 46 days out, your occupancy is unusually low. Now, how do you determine unusually low? Well, you do have to have some kind of a benchmark for that. So sometimes you can do it by gut feel based on your knowledge of certain weekends or the market. But also if you have historical data, that's very helpful to determine kind of what it should be and if you're trending behind. And let's say then you determine that these dates have unusually low occupancy and availability is fairly high. So why is that? And you start wondering, and you look here and you look at the competitor rates, and you're the blue line and your competitor average is, let's say, the yellow line. Well, you can see right there that the average competitor rate has dropped substantially in that period, and so you're probably losing a lot of bookings to some of your direct competitors. And so this gives you a chance now in day one to kind of remediate that and maybe match some of your competitor rates, lower a couple of rates so that you can get more of that volume. Otherwise, you might end up with very low occupancy for that period. Now let's take a look at another example. Now this example is a little bit different. Let's say this is your expected trend line for availability and occupancy. And let's say you notice that these dates in here are unusually high, and you've got higher occupancy, higher reservations than you might expect for those dates, and your availability is lower, and maybe there's some big event or something that you knew about going on, or maybe something that you were not aware of going on. Perhaps one of your competitors mispriced their rooms and lost a lot of share to you. Or maybe a competitor kind of closed a bunch of rooms and had less availability. So any number of things could be happening, some of which you're aware of and some of which maybe you're not aware of, but you notice that your occupancy is pretty high. And so you then kind of look at competitor data and you notice that, yeah, sure enough, your competitors, your average rate for your competitors during that period has gone up substantially. And so you appear to be a better value versus your competitors. So you're getting more of those bookings. And maybe they raise rates also because they're aware of some increase in demand during that period. So this is an opportunity for you to raise rates and keep that same sort of premium level that you have. Let me get the pointer out here. But you can see here you've got a premium of about, this is $200 a night versus maybe $180 a night. But here it goes up to almost the same. So you might want to just kind of raise your rates a little bit in this period and increase your revenue and profitability per night. So this is another example of how you could use this sort of data to improve your profitability if your occupancy or your reservations are unusually high. So let's summarize a little bit, some of these steps in terms of building your own solution. Initially, you would pull availability data from the PMS because it includes all the channels. Then you layer on top of that the competitor data for 90 days or more if you want. From OTAs and other paid data services, you can pull that data. And then you combine that data in a spreadsheet and you line up the dates as columns. I like columns as dates because you kind of read from left to right, and it's pretty intuitive to think of a timeline going from left to right. And then, each row is, your availability, your rates, your competitor rates, and you create some key ratios as well. And I'll show you some of those. But some of those key ratios, for example, is your rate versus competitors, and what that ratio looks like, or how many rooms are available based on the time left to sell those rooms. So we'll show you some ratios here in a second. But you create some additional rows, and then you use some conditional formatting perhaps to flag some of the highs and lows. So you can paint a whole range. I usually like to make it sort of 90 days, and it'll show you which numbers are unusually high or low within that range, which numbers are above average or below average, and so on. And it just helps you kind of see some of the outliers out in the future when you're dealing with a lot of this data. And then you adjust the rates in the spreadsheet and send them for manual changes to the PMS or the OTA. Now, if you're doing this in a spreadsheet, you are going to probably have to send this to someone, or maybe you do it yourself, but you're going to have to adjust rates, right? If you decide that rates are too high or too low for a period, you're going to say, for these 15 dates, change the rate from 250 to 230, or from 250 to 280. So that needs to get into the system somehow and get implemented. And if there's an automated system, this is where some of the automated systems cost a lot of money, but you can make the change right in the revenue management system, and it'll push the rate changes to the PMS, and then the PMS kind of makes the change on those rates for those room types and for those specific dates, and then it pushes those new updated rates out to the channel manager and to all the channels and the booking engine and everything. So that's part of what you pay for with the automated systems. But if you're doing a spreadsheet, then you just need to make sure that any changes in the spreadsheet are tracked so that the recipient knows and can see, hey, okay, these rates changed, the rest of these all stayed the same, right? So they can just see the changes. So you want to kind of flag that in some way when there's any kind of a change, and then you implement it. You just enter those dates in the PMS, and usually if you're doing this weekly, you're not going to have a ton of changes, so it's not a lot of data entry, but if you're making lots of changes, then it can be a little bit time consuming, but if you're doing it pretty frequently, you should just kind of be tweaking certain dates and room types. So here's an example of a spreadsheet. I know this is kind of a lot to look at here, and I'll try and go through this slowly here. And let me get the pointer working here. So there's the laser pointer. So at the very top here, right, this is the total number of rooms that you have. And this could just be for a standard room, or it could be for your whole property. Now, if you're going to do this at the room level, and let's say you have 4 room types, you would just copy all of this for each room type, right? But let's say we're just dealing with the standard room right now, and you have 15 of these, okay? And here's how many you have available, which are unsold, right? So you've got 5 and 5, that's good, so that's in green. And this is kind of the conditional formatting that I talked about. So 5, 5, 6, 7. Up here, then the availability starts to get a little high. These are a lot of unsold rooms. And so this is kind of your occupancy calculation, 67%, down to 20% here. And so that starts to become a little bit concerning, especially because those dates are coming up very soon. And so what you have here is a ratio of, unsold rooms versus days left to sell. Now, in this particular case, this was done, a few weeks ago. So this date here, November 13th, is 49 days away. And, this is 50 days away, 51 days, and so on. So right in here, you're kind of doing okay because it's out in the future. There's 49 or 50 days left to sell, and you've only got 5 or 6 rooms left, so it's green, right? This is a ratio of rooms unsold to days left to sell. Now out here, it starts to get a little more concerning, right? It kind of turns yellow because based on the amount of time left to sell, the unsold rooms are a little high, and at some points this can also become red. Then you want to look at the current effective rate. This is another ratio that I mentioned. So this is effective rate, just means that it's the rack rate after all of the changes, whether it's packages or promotions or other changes. It's sort of the effective final consumer rate, yours versus the competitive set. So in here you're at 68, 66, or 70, and so that's pretty good. It's kind of green or yellow. Here it kind of turns red, and maybe this is why your availability increased, right, and your occupancy is starting to decline because your rates are higher than usual versus the competitive set. Now here's your current rack rate of 269, and then here's the proposed, right? So the proposed is what's going to change. Now right here we've changed these dates down to 239, and this is where you would want to flag this in some way. Maybe you create a conditional formatting here as well to kind of show that there's been a change. And then here you can see also, this is another way of kind of flagging that there's been a change here. This is the change in the effective rate. So it really looks at this effective rate here, which is, after the discount that's running in the market. This is the effective rate of $191 compared to what it used to be. So it's a drop of $24. And now you can see that the effective rate versus the comp set is a little more in line, right? You're at mostly sort of green, yellow, orange here instead of the red here. So you're a little more in line with your competitors. There's more detail down here of your competitor rates. And then usually we just use the average competitor rate. Now if you're doing this at the room level, some of those paid data services can allow you to pull in specific room types from each competitor that will compete with your room type here. So if you have like a 2-bedroom ocean view, you would not compare that maybe to a 2-bedroom garden view or 2-bedroom pool view, or you wouldn't want to compare a 2-bedroom to a 1-bedroom, and so on. So this allows you to kind of pull in specific room rates for competitors for rooms that compete directly with your room here. So let's look at some other ways of looking at this data here. Now this is smaller, right? You may not be able to read all the numbers, but I kind of wanted to show you the way you can spot some trends and issues, with some colors. This is just an expanded version of what we looked at, but here's some dates out in the future, and you can see you're doing okay here. Everything's green in terms of your unsold rooms, but then they do start to turn red here, right? And as you look down, you see that, yeah, your rates are unusually high versus your comp set here. And then it turns good again. So you're going to go in here and you're going to adjust your proposed rate and then eventually put that into your system in the PMS. And then here, this is kind of flagging the whole period where you've changed rates. So this is from the 15th to the 7th. So I don't know, that's probably about 20, 22 dates where you would change the rack rate, and then it can flow all the way through to the channel manager and adjust automatically down the line. And I'll talk about that more in a second because that's also another issue to think about. But then you can see here also that the proposed rate is now more in line with competitors. And the competitors, here's the competitor rate. So we can see more clearly here that your availability rose not because your rates went up. Your rates were pretty consistent at 269 for this whole period. But for one reason or another, your competitor average dropped a lot in this period, right? So the average competitor rate became much lower here. compared to 318, 328, and so on. Here it's regularly at 280, 290. And so that's part of why you were losing volume and sales there. So hopefully with this adjustment, you would start to get more volume again and occupancy in those dates. Now here's an even smaller view, and obviously I do not intend for you to be able to read this, but I did want to show you a couple of other types of adjustments. So every property has a different booking window, right? Some properties that are maybe very urban or cater to business travelers may have a booking window that is a little shorter, like maybe 2 or 3 weeks is maybe their average booking window, maybe even shorter, right? They might have a lot of bookings that come in the day before. And so you do need to think about your booking window, and resorts and leisure travel may be planned more in advance, right? Like vacations. So the average booking window there might be 30 days or even 60 days or even longer in certain markets. And so you have more time to sell those rooms on the one hand. On the other hand, if it gets too close and these rooms are unsold, very few of your customers actually book to arrive next week or tomorrow in some of those markets, and so you might have trouble selling those rooms if they get really close. So you should be looking further out to be kind of adjusting your rates, because people are kind of booking further out here. So your booking window might be here, let's say, where your average booking is sort of about, I don't know what that says there, maybe it's about 14 days from this date, and your bookings tend to go like this, and then they kind of drop off, and then you have very few bookings further out. But the bulk of your bookings are coming right here in this sort of a period, right? On the other hand, if you're more of a resort, or if people book much further in advance, then the bulk of your bookings is coming out here, so you need to be really managing this area pretty tightly. And if these dates start to move closer in here, you're going to have trouble selling them, because very few of your customers actually book in such a short time period. So you want to kind of really focus in on this area. So you do need to take your booking window into account. So this gets into some nitty-gritty detail, but I think it's important. There's two basic ways to adjust rates from a mathematical standpoint, right? Let's say we're really just talking about one rate. You could adjust the rack rate in the PMS, and then it flows through to the channel manager where it gets modified, right? And 10% less for package rates, and maybe with breakfast costs $15 more. Maybe you push net rates to certain channels, and there may be other adjustments that the channel manager makes and then pushes those rates out. And all of this happens automatically in the channel manager, right? I mean, you do have to set it up initially, of course, but once these things are set up, then any rate changes coming from the PMS automatically get modified with these same rules and then pushed out. And then it gets pushed out to the booking engine, to Expedia, to Booking.com, and lots of other channels that you may have connected to the channel manager. And some people have maybe 10 or 15 channels. That gets hard to manage for a small hotel, but certainly 7 or 8 even becomes very difficult to make all of these modifications. And then there's discounts applied, and as I said, each of these discounts has to be applied at the OTA or at the booking engine. So these would also be automatic in this scenario, in the sense that you make the rate change up here at the PMS, and then it goes into the channel manager, it gets modified automatically, it gets pushed into each channel automatically, and then the discount gets applied at each channel automatically. So, of course you can change the discounts more frequently if you want, but then you have to replicate that change in every single channel, and it does become very hard to manage, very time consuming. And so this discount here still gives you the promotional effect that we talked about in the previous webinar. So it's not just a rate drop, right? It's not just a rate change. It is actually a promotion, and you get a lot of that good merchandising and the banners and the strike-throughs and so on that really convey extra value to the consumer. So you still get that impact here, but you can make adjustments to the rates up here for certain dates or certain rooms, and then it just pushes through, all these numbers calculate automatically. Now, the other scenario is you adjust the promotional rates. And in that case, maybe you don't change the PMS rates at all, in other words, the rack rate. And the channel manager makes the same modifiers it always does. And each booking engine, well, the booking engine receives the same rate from the channel manager. And then you have to go and adjust the discount or the promotion on the booking engine. Maybe you have more than one. You might even have two or three. Then you have to go to Expedia and adjust the discount there. Then you have to go to booking.com and adjust the promotions there. And then go to each and every one other channel and adjust those promotions in all of those places. And if you don't do that properly, you can have rate parity problems. And that's a whole other issue that we talk about in the course. But, you know, you may want to favor your booking engine for obvious reasons because it's more profitable, and you can do that with special value add offers and other things that we'll discuss. But in general, if you do not have rate parity, these channels will really suffer because, you know, they're not competitive, so they're going to give your property less visibility. The same goes with traditional travel agents. If they're selling a hotel at a particular rate, and then their client goes and finds a cheaper rate in another channel, they look really bad. And so those traditional travel agents are less likely to sell your hotel as well. So you get very little sales in those other channels if the rates that you give them are not competitive. So keeping parity in most cases that I've seen is a really good thing. If you want to have lower rates in your booking engine, you're certainly free to do that. There are ways to avoid some of the bots, and we talk about that in the course in detail as well. But you know, these automated bots that check on rate parity, there are ways that you can put in the booking engine. For example, you can require the consumer to enter a code to get a special rate that's only on your site, or you can throw in lots of additional benefits, or you can do something like buy 4 nights and get the 5th night free, that type of thing. But anyway, those are that's parity. It's a whole separate conversation. But bringing it back here, you know, if first of all, this takes a lot of time, and I've seen some properties, even medium-sized properties with 70 or 80 rooms, where it takes 2 people like 2 days to do all of this, and so it becomes time-consuming. It's also easy to make mistakes, and keeping rate parity can become very, very difficult. And then your property goes down in the rankings and visibility. So you have a situation where you have maybe the worst of both worlds in the sense that you've lowered your rate, so now you're making less per night. But if you mess this up, you could also be damaging your volume. So you're getting, you know, a lower rate and less volume. If you're going to lower rate, you need to at least be getting more volume, and hopefully a lot more volume. So that's a whole other concept called rate elasticity, which we get into in more detail as well. But I think the important thing right here to understand is that the way you implement promotions matters. And this method over here is much more automatic. It's much quicker. It allows you to make adjustments every week by just adjusting the rack rate. And if all of these things are programmed properly, you don't have to mess with them too often, and you'll keep rate parity. And it makes everything kind of more automatic. Whereas this one creates, you know, a lot more work for individual pieces and can create additional problems. So I'm going to leave it at that. I could probably talk about this for hours, but I'm going to leave it at that, and let's keep moving here. So now we've talked about 2 sort of ways to adjust rates based on math and so on, and doing it manually. There's also 2 methods in terms of, you know, manual and automatic with software. So I wanted to give a quick comparison of that. So with the manual method, the benefits are, you know, you can align your rates in the future with occupancy and with actual sales and reservations. You can also align your rates with market demand and specific competitors, and all of that is extremely valuable to make sure that your rates are properly positioned in the market relative to your competition and relative to the amount of supply that you still have. Now, it does require some time and some expertise in Excel. You know, sometimes it can take you know, a couple of days for some people, but if you keep it simple and you use the template that we provide in the course, it can certainly get you much further down the road. And it does require a little bit of customization for your property, but pretty basic Excel skills would enable you to do that. And you could have somebody do that maybe in a couple of hours. And you could maybe do it once a week. And that could add significant profit to your business. Now, again, that's if you're smaller, or if you're not doing it at all, or if you're struggling to do it at all. There's kind of a process and a template that you can use that we've been using for years with a lot of properties in different countries. So we've kind of worked through a lot of those wrinkles, and it's pretty simple and basic. So it suits a lot of people. You can always add to it if you want, because it is Excel. If you really want to get more creative and more advanced, you can also kind of build your own out. Then the other option, of course, is doing it more automatic with revenue management software. So the benefits, some of the benefits are the same, right? You get alignment of your rates with your occupancy in the future. You get alignment with market demand and competitors, but you also get more speed, which means more repetition. So, if some of these systems are really fully integrated, you could do this almost every day, right? And a lot of really big hotels have more automated systems, and they do this every day. But smaller ones don't necessarily have these systems, so they don't necessarily have the speed, which then speed translates into repetition and being able to do it daily or weekly. Now, even smaller hotels probably don't change their rates daily, although some could certainly do that if they have these systems. Weekly might be sufficient, but it basically allows you a lot more repetition. Now, it does require time to set up these systems. Some of them are 2 or 3 months. Some of them are probably a month, but that's probably because it doesn't have as much automation and iteration. There's also some expertise and system training that's required. And if you live in a very remote area, and somebody gets trained on the system and leaves, then you have to fill that capacity again, and the expertise. It also requires some money, and the monthly rates vary on some of these systems, but they can go on the low end from $300 a month up to $2,000 a month, and then the setup can be $1,000 to $10,000 for the initial setup, because there's a lot of programming and connections that go into this, so that you can view the data automatically in the revenue management software, and view it in a similar way to what I showed you with the spreadsheets, and it pulls data automatically from the PMS, and then you view it, you make your decisions, and when you make a change right there in the RMS, it pushes those changes directly into the PMS and then flows through to all your systems, probably in a matter of minutes, all the way out to each and every market, every consumer touch point. So that kind of automation is pretty good, pretty slick. A lot of hotels have it, but it does cost some money. So something to think about. So I know some of you love spending time with all of the data, but some of you don't. So hopefully that showed you at least the importance of doing this on a regular schedule. And for some of you, it may seem like a pretty big challenge and something that you don't enjoy doing, or you might not have the skills necessarily. But once you start doing it and work through some of the problems and challenges, and you make it a regular event, maybe every week or every 2 weeks, you or your team or the 2 or 3 people involved in pulling this data together and then making decisions and then implementing the decisions, you will gradually kind of develop a rhythm with it, and it does become easier with practice, and you may have to work out a few wrinkles here and there in your process, or in your spreadsheet or in your data, but if you start doing it on a regular basis, you can kind of get a rhythm. Again, some of you may already be doing this, and maybe this helps you kind of refine your process a little bit. I don't know. So everybody's at a little bit of a different stage, but it is definitely a very valuable exercise and process to go through. Now we also see some hotels, independent hotels in different parts of the world, that they just want someone to tell them once a week, tell me what dates the rates need to change, and what the rate needs to change to, and for which rooms. Just tell me what changes I need to make within the next, say, 90 days, and that's all I want. I don't want to mess with any software. I don't want to mess with any spreadsheets or data or any of that stuff. And so in those cases, we can pull, sometimes they just send us the raw data once a week. That can also be very automatic. And we kind of pull it together and send it to them. So if you're interested in that, just drop us an email. That's kind of a separate service that we offer as well. But sometimes that's all people want, right? Anyway, that's about it for yield management today. Tomorrow, I think we're going to talk about Google and HPA and generating traffic for direct bookings. So join us, not tomorrow, I guess it's in about 3 days actually. So we're going to have the next webinar is going to be on that topic, and I hope you'll join us. So I'll see you in a few days.